Writing assignments. They're subjectively marked, nearly impossible to get perfect on, and they involve the dreaded references. No! Professors, and me included, typically don't spend enough time teaching how to identify or conduct references. We either assume that you know how to do it from a previous class, or we'll just Google it. Now that's a bit of a fail on our part, and I want to rectify that in this video. So in this video, I'll give you my top 5 tips for referencing like a professor. It was a little lame. Hey guys, I'm Professor Michael Linsky. I'm a management professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. I use my professor experience over the past decade to share insights to give students a little extra advantage how to succeed and make their student life a little bit easier in college or uni. I generally talk about topics that are not taught in the classroom but learn the hard way throughout student life. So if you're in college or uni or will be soon, hit subscribe, hit the like, and come along with me and check out my weekly clips. All right, let's jump into this one. In this video, I'll be talking about how to reference papers, and specifically I'll be sharing my top tips that I often give students, but a couple caveats first. One, I won't be talking about anything related to paragraph or sentence structure. I'll leave that for another video. I'll also not be talking about how many references or citations you're going to need. Typically, each paragraph needs 1 citation. No, I won't talk about that at all, as those details are typically found in your assignment instructions, and if they're not, ask your professor. Lastly, I want to note is that referencing style varies drastically by discipline. There's APA, there's MLA, there's Chicago, Harvard, and the list goes on. In this video, I'll be talking exclusively about APA, as that's the predominant form in my area, and frankly, it's the only referencing style I know anything about. However, the tips that I'm going to be sharing in this video are applicable to other referencing styles. Just know that there are some stylistic differences. On that note, you should find out what type of referencing style you should be using in your essay or assignment. My first tip to help students find a reference is don't do it right away. Instead, identify what your story is and then find references afterwards that help support your story. Most students do not like writing assignments because they hate or they dread finding references. So what they do is they actually jump into finding those references right away to get the hard part out of the way, and then they write the paper after. But don't do that. Don't fall into that trap, because you'll end up spending more time hunting for references because you don't know really what you're hunting for. You'll find references that don't go together. They don't fit an overarching story. They don't make an overarching story, and they'll actually make your paper worse because you have a couple references that are kind of like jumbled together. It's kind of like putting a bunch of puzzle pieces together from different puzzles, right? It just doesn't make sense. Instead, what you should do is just read generally. Read chapters, read a couple papers, ideally 3 or 4 in a general area to get a better understanding as to what you actually want to say. As you're going along, you might help refine what your story is. At this part of the process, I generally use bullet points just to help identify what the structure or the flow of the paper will be. Now, a couple tricks as you're going along. You're going to want to copy and paste sentences to a Word document from the different articles or chapters you're reading about. You'll eventually have to rewrite these, but at least it gives you an idea as to what to do. And just to keep in mind, when you're copying this sentence over, make sure you include the reference so that you can include it in your particular paper. Another thing you're going to want to do is identify similarities and differences across papers. So this is a clever tactic. If you see competing ideas, it might be something to explore further. Why do these competing views exist? An interesting paper might be required to reconcile these different views. And professors just love tension. So in this paper, for example, you identify a previous study that has a positive effect, previous study that has a negative effect. So you might explore, well, why do they have different effects? You could talk about it, acknowledge that they are different, figure out, that's interesting, and then continue down that road. Another thing is don't try to take on too much in any one paper. A lot of us want to take over the world when we're writing an assignment, but don't do that. As general of thumb, being specific is better over being vague. Lastly, don't keep quotes just because they sound good. I know all of us find a quote and we get obsessed with it and we want to write an entire paper around one quote. Don't do that. The best papers are the ones that combine a bunch of references or quotes that fit based on an overarching story. A quote isn't a story. Figure out your story first and then find references and quotes to help support it. And as a last thing to remember here, summing it all up, if you don't remember anything else about this video, remember this. The most important thing is to find a story before finding references. If you don't have a story, there is no point in identifying references. So my second referencing tip is don't over or under reference. Most students mess up referencing because they don't know when to reference or how often to reference. Some students don't reference enough. They essentially turn research papers into opinion pieces, whereas others reference too much, which drastically interrupts the flow of a paper. Now the latter group, referencing too much, those students, that actually crushes me because I know those students are trying extra hard and they're demonstrating how much they're researching in a particular area. However, you're gonna have to remember that this is your assignment, your voice. Even if you rewrite segments or paraphrase what other people have said, you're essentially rewriting their story and not yours. Your story is most important. Okay? Now, using the rubrics is generally a good place to start in terms of figuring out how much to reference. However, I do apologize, we often make rubrics incredibly vague because we don't want everybody's assignment to look exactly the same. So as a result, we often don't tell you exactly how many references to include. Bust. I know it's frustrating, but we're actually doing it so that you can develop your creative writing style on your own. However, when you're early in college or university, you might need a little more guidance or structure when including references. So as a result, I'm going to provide a couple general guidelines when to include references. First, you're going to want to include a reference anytime you introduce a new term or concept. That is generally at the beginning of a paragraph, and I recommend you straight up just take a definition from another source. Grab that definition, put some quotes around it, include a page number, and go from there. Another time you're going to include a reference is when you're creating a tension or providing opposing views. So as I previously mentioned, the positive and negative, you're going to want to provide references associated with each of those perspectives, just in case somebody wants to go back and make sure that you are indeed telling the truth and you found opposing perspectives on a particular topic. Another time you're going to want to include a reference is anytime you make a big statement. You're going to want to support these statements because people may not believe you, or they want to figure out who else said what you said, just in case you paraphrased it incorrectly. The last one you're going to include a reference is anytime you want to make an extra punch to a particular area of your paper. I recommend using a quote, but again, don't overquote. Overquoting is even worse than over-referencing, okay? So don't do that. So what I recommend is either at the beginning of your assignment or essay or somewhere throughout, you're going to want to italicize it, throw some quotes, throw a page number around, and that'll give you a little extra punch to get the attention of whoever's reading your paper. My third referencing tip is to use Google Scholar, and it's amazing. Google Scholar is like a Google search engine for finding academic references. Now, I know there's a lot of other websites and databases available. Google Scholar is by far the most popular, it's the most user-friendly, it is the best one. So even in situations where your professor tells you, hey, you have to use our school library website in order to find the references, don't do it. Use Google Scholar first, find the reference, and then if you really want to, you can backtrack and use the school library website to find the reference there as well. In fact, almost exclusively do academics in my field use Google Scholar. So let me break it down for you a little bit and show you actually how to use it. All right, so how Google Scholar works, it is just like Google. You type in the concept you want to search, push enter. In the middle, you find a list of academic articles related to the concept you put in there. On the right-hand side are a list of articles you can actually read. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to right-click the ones that are interesting to me. Oh, this one. Oh, perhaps this one is also really interesting. And then you can just go and read the articles. I like to keep this main page just so that you can go back to it as you're flipping through them. Another thing you can do is actually how you search for the word. I like to always put quotes around it because when you use quotes, that makes it seem like a string. Okay. If there's no quotes around it, the paper just makes it so that there is, let's do this. So the two words within the paper. So you might have a paper that has the word work and another paper that has the word engagement, but they're not necessarily together. So what I like to do is always keep them together, and then it'll only search for articles that have the words work engagement together. Okay. If that string is important to you, then I would do it. If you want to add another string or another word, I recommend using the plus, because if you don't use the plus, it's a bit of an and or, but if you use a plus, it's only going to identify journal articles that have both terms in there. So I always recommend the plus. Some professors mandate that you use a certain year range. You can dictate what year you want, whether you want just the recent years or whether you want a specific custom year range. Another thing I would look at is how many times a particular paper has been referenced, okay, has been cited. Cited by is a good indication of the quality of the journal and the paper. If you have a large number of citations for the paper, such as this one, you know that that's going to be a good paper, and that's something that's probably pretty safe to reference. If you go down here, oh, this is another big one, but if you go down, I was trying to find one that didn't, oh, here you go. It's only been referenced once. This one is probably one that I would not reference in my paper because it has only been referenced one time. I usually look for a higher number. So my fourth referencing tip is to not use a reference management software. Particularly for undergrads, I do not recommend using the software at all. It'll take quite a bit of time to learn how to use the software, and you're probably only going to reference a few articles in your paper, so it just doesn't make sense. The amount of time you'll have to invest in learning the software versus the amount of output or number of references you actually have to cite appropriately in an assignment, I just don't think it makes sense. It just doesn't add up for me. But for some people, they absolutely love using the software. They swear it and they get so excited about it, and they think it saves so much time. However, these individuals who love using the software are typically in their PhD or already have their PhD and conduct research frequently. So for them, it might make sense. If you're in your undergrad, I don't think it does. So my fifth referencing tip is to reference all sources in at least 2 places, in the text as well as at the end of the document. And most students often forget about either referencing in the text or they forget about including the full reference in the bibliography or referencing page. Don't do that. Make sure you're going to include it both at least once in the text as well as at the end of the document. So in-text citations vary by referencing style. Here I'll be showing you the APA formatting. So in-text citations are great in that they clearly show what sentence is referenced by which article or collection of articles. So for APA formatting, you're going to include a parentheses right at the end of the sentence before the period. You're going to have the author's last name and year. And if there's multiple authors, you're going to have the first author's last name and then et al., which just refers to in Latin for and others, and then the year. And if you're quoting a segment of text, put quotes around the segment that you've quoted word for word, include the author's last name, year, and then page number. Now, when you're referencing at the end of the document, it's often referred to as a bibliography or referencing page. Now these are key because they provide an area for the full reference for that particular source. Again, these vary by referencing style, and here I'm showing you APA formatting. Now, a lot of students struggle about, okay, how do I actually reference here? Do I put a comma, do a period? Where do I put the parentheses? What do I actually need to include? The volume, page number? I don't know. Again, I recommend the use of Google Scholar. Have I mentioned? It's fantastic. When you're looking on Google Scholar page, and you're looking for a full reference for the end of the document, you see a little quotation button under each reference. Just click on it and it will show you the full reference for that particular source. What you do, again, find your referencing style that fits you, copy and paste directly into your bibliography, and you're done. I know I said I only had 5 tips, but I actually have 6. But it's just because 5 tips sounds better. Nobody says 6 top tips. No, nobody, not this guy. Anyways, here's my 6th tip, just in case you want it. If not, you can close the window, but you're gonna want this tip because it's a really good one. Okay, ready? Here we go. Number 6, don't forget about your audience that you're writing for, meaning who's evaluating your paper. Okay, typically this will be a professor or a TA. Professors, whether in college or uni, generally conduct some type of research, so they may be perceived to be an expert. So you could reference them when you're writing a topic, okay? But this is a bit of a double-edged sword, so you want to be careful here. On the one hand, some professors might view you referencing them as a bit of a form of flattery and might pad their ego. It might be a compliment to them. But on the flip side, well, referencing an area that your professor is perceived to be an expert in might lead to more critical marking because they've already read all the papers in the space. They know the area really well, and as a result, they know where the gaps are, where the holes are, and what area needs further exploration. So as a result, it might lead to more critical marking of your particular paper. So you want to be careful. And if you don't know whether your professor is more likely to be flattered or be more critical of your paper, best just to steer clear of their topic altogether. Find a topic that they know nothing about, and then right there, just stay in the clear. Better safe than sorry. So that's it, guys. Those are my top 5 or 6 tips to referencing like a prof. If you found this video interesting and want to hear more clips next week that make your student life a little bit more manageable, hit subscribe, smash the like, and check me out next week. Take care.